Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemarie Miller, here with Jeff Dyer, a professor at Brigham Young University and the co founder of Innovator's DNA and Innovation Consultancy. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Rosemary. Glad to be here.
Yes, so, Jeff, first of all, I'm kind of interested in what even inspired this study. So, you co founded this study about innovation can be hampered when organizations prioritize psychological safety at the expense of intellectual honesty. What inspired this study?
So, I am a fan of psychological safety, and I really think that organizations and teams are far better off when people feel safe, they feel included, they feel accepted and respected, and they feel safe to speak up. And so I was surprised when about 5 years ago, I was writing a cover story for Forbes on Tesla. Now, my innovation consultancy, Innovator's DNA, we did Forbes' most innovative companies list, and Tesla was number one that year. And I remember interviewing an executive and asked him about how they were able to be innovative. And he said, I don't think we have a lot of psychological safety here at Tesla. But what we are is we are very blunt about getting to the truth about what we need to do. And we are willing to speak up and voice ideas and disagreement when we need to. And I think that's actually more important to innovation than psychological safety. So that's where it took me aback, and I decided, let's try and figure out what it is, if it's not psychological safety that gets people to speak up and voice ideas and disagreement, which is really important to innovation, what is it? And that's what led to this idea of intellectual honesty.
So, could you define those terms for our audience a bit? Psychological safety and intellectual honesty.
Yeah, so psychological safety refers to a team culture where team members feel included, they feel respected, they feel helped, and they feel safe to speak up. Intellectual honesty refers to a team culture where team members are willing to voice ideas, suggestions, even when they expect disagreement. And ideally, they try to do it in a hyper rational, unbiased way. And that's hard. So we're trying to get you to be like Mr. Spock, right? Just the facts. Like we are going to be very rational, unemotional, and we're seeking truth. And that's the intellectual part of it that's really important to get folks to really focus on the data, the facts, and what we should do as a result of what we know.
And you mentioned four basic team cultures. Could you explain those? You have anxious culture, innovative culture, distress culture, comfortable culture. What does that mean?
So we created a 2 by 2 matrix where we measured the psychological safety of teams in different organizations, and we measured the intellectual honesty of teams in organizations. Now, there are some teams that are high on psychological safety, but relatively low on intellectual honesty. In fact, when we were studying Tesla, a company that was the reverse of that, we also studied Ford, another automaker, to see if there was a difference. We found Ford had a comfortable culture, high psychological safety, but relatively low intellectual honesty in terms of people being really actively candid in voicing ideas and disagreement. On the flip side of that was Tesla, a company that was lower on psychological safety, but high on intellectual honesty. So people are more candid, they're more blunt, they speak up, but it created more of an anxious culture. One of the things we've done is we've studied organizations' cultures by looking at the Glassdoor data of what their employees say. So we have like tens of thousands of comments about these companies, various companies, based upon what the employees say. An innovative culture would be high on both, high on psychological safety, high on intellectual honesty. And we found that Amazon falls into that innovative culture a little bit maybe on the anxious side. And we found like Netflix, for example, and Adobe had cultures that we would describe as innovative, meaning pretty high psychological safety and intellectual honesty. And then, of course, there are the low companies. And those are ones where you don't feel safe to speak up. You don't feel like you want to be honest about anything. There are various reasons for that. That's a distressed culture. Certainly, you can point to companies like Theranos, where there was a distressed culture. People weren't willing to speak up. So those are sort of the four basic cultures that teams seem to have, and organizations as well.
I'm kind of wondering, do you think this has to do with like how old a leader may be, how old or young, what generation they're in? Like, are companies more likely to be intellectually honest if it's filled with more, I don't know, baby boomers or possibly Gen Z? Like, could you explain that?
So I would say that I don't think age has much to do with it, but I do think the characteristics of the people on the team and organization have something to do with it. For example, if we think about personality traits, some of us have high needs for achievement. We have higher needs to be right than to be liked. Others have higher needs to be liked than to be right. Steve Jobs was one, he would rather be right than liked. And so he said, I'm brutally honest. And that's the price of admission to being in a meeting with me. So I do think there's that dimension of us as individuals. I think there's also the fact that some of us, we are more proactive just generally. There's a proactivity measure of personality where we're just more likely to speak up. And others of us are more reserved and less likely to speak up. And if you have a higher need for achievement and you're very proactive, then you're more likely to speak up and be intellectually honest. Now, of course, that means you're trying to do it in an unbiased way, and that's really important to what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Jeff, why would someone not speak up in a psychologically safe environment?
So that's something that's really interesting that we learned in our research. And that is, there are times when all of us may feel safe to speak up. I feel safe to speak up, but I choose not to. And there's typically two main reasons. One is an external reason. We feel like if we speak up, there's like nobody listening. Nobody's there that really cares about my idea, my suggestion, a problem I'm going to point out. And so if we don't feel like the team leader or the organization wants our ideas, really wants to take action to get better, then we just decide not to speak up. The second reason is really an internal reason. And that is, I can speak up, I feel safe to do so, but I choose not to because it's just not worth it to me. And really it comes down to, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to maybe disagree with someone if that might make them feel uncomfortable. I don't want to invite more work. Like maybe if I offer an idea or suggestion, I'm going to be asked to do it. So when employees are not engaged enough with the purpose of the organization or team, then a lot of times they won't voice their ideas, their suggestions, even when they feel safe to do so, because it's just not worth the cost.
I'm thinking of myself, Jeff. I've only been in the workforce for about a year, and being so new, I know that Gen Z, we have this thing where we're soft. We're softer than others. I don't know, maybe it's a frontal lobe development situation. But I'm wondering, are leaders trying to like tailor the way that they reach us because there's this notion of softness? And it's not just with Gen Z, it's honestly with like the world. If we think about it now, there's cancel culture, anything you do, anything you say.
Sure.
So could you hit on that?
Yeah, so actually I think that we find that the younger generation tends to not do well with direct feedback, especially if it's viewed as critical. And I do think that leads to leaders trying to be really careful about trying to perhaps give performance feedback or disagree, but try and do it in a way that you're not offending the person. And I think this is where organizations need to step in. And the organization can help by creating a management principle that we follow that helps give people the legitimacy to speak up, but also to try and help people to, have a little bit of a thick skin and understand that's just the way we do things here. So for example, Amazon has a core management principle, which is have backbone, disagree, but then commit. And then they instruct leaders that you are supposed to disagree, even if it's exhausting, but once a decision is made, then you commit and you follow it. And we expect disagreement. That's just the way things are here. And it's okay to be disagreed with, because if you have a different point of view than me and we disagree, it means there's an opportunity to learn. And that's, I think, a very important thing that our younger folks could learn, is that disagreement means there's an opportunity to learn. This can be positive. Let's not think about it as negative.
Yeah. So for Amazon, that's basically their culture. And culture is one of those terms where it's important, but it's hard to implement. It's like easier said than done. And what steps can leaders take to actually ensure that there's a healthy culture? Let's say I'm a leader. Like, what advice would you give me?
So I would try to fast track intellectual honesty, and I would tell the team, we're going to try and help everybody to feel comfortable and safe. We want psychological safety, but sometimes it's a brand new team and you don't know each other well. So it's hard to feel really safe. But here are the rules we're going to follow. Number one, let's make sure we all agree that the common goal we're working on is really important to all of us. We are more likely to speak up if we are engaged in the mission and the common goal. So let's agree on the goal and be clear about that. Number two, I want to make sure that it's okay that we expect disagreement, because that's when we learn, when we each have a different point of view. So disagreement is good, and you should feel comfortable disagreeing with me, and I will often ask, what's the flaw in my argument, or what's the flaw in our course of action? So we want to expect disagreement of each other, but we do it respectfully. That's important as well. Without emotion, but we're trying to do it respectfully. The third thing I think is really important is that we realize we all have biases that we come to problems or issues with. And at the beginning of a decision-making process, it really helps if we reveal our biases. So for example, I remember I was on a team, we were trying to make a hiring decision. This is at BYU in the management department. We asked to reveal our biases up front, and one team member revealed a bias around, I think we need gender diversity for this hire, and here are the reasons for it. And then someone else revealed, well, I think we need this specific expertise, and revealed the bias around it. And then we're able to have a discussion around the priorities for this particular position, understanding the different biases that we each have. So I think that's another thing that you can do, is try and get that happen up front. And then the main thing that a leader can make sure that everyone is able to do is have a voice. So if you as the leader can make sure team members are listened to, you can be an empathetic listener and make sure you encourage and get everybody to speak up, then I think you've done a great job as a leader. So
I'm kind of wondering, have the conditions for creating this kind of change, for creating this kind of idea, have they changed at all? Like, we live in anxious times these days where we're seeing mass layoffs, such as, I'm thinking of one particular, this isn't a mass layoff, but I'm thinking of one particular instance with Elon Musk recently. He's allegedly asking his team why his tweets aren't being seen. One of the engineers or someone, they told him why, and immediately on the spot they were fired. These are anxious times we're in. So do these rules still apply for where we are today?
So the example you give is a great one of why Elon Musk has not inspired psychological safety in his organization. He wants people to be blunt unless he doesn't like the idea. And that's a problem. So I think you can end up shutting down dialogue. Ideally, you get psychological safety, people feeling included, accepted, respected, and safe to speak up. And then they do it. They actually speak up. But you have to be willing to listen. You have to be that empathetic listener, and you have to give every idea its due voice and really hear it. And so I think that's one of the ways you take away the anxiety is you help people to feel safe.
So,
What I
how would you
can't,
tell a leader like Elon Musk to be an empathetic listener? How would that actually happen?
so I think, yeah, it's almost like Elon Musk would need training on emotional intelligence in terms of managing his own emotions and being able to manage and understand others' emotions. And that's one of the keys to developing psychological safety is having a leader who has emotional intelligence where they regulate their own emotions well and they can manage others and make sure people do feel heard, understood, and accepted and respected. So I think if the leader is not that way, it's very hard to create psychological safety. And Musk sometimes, he'll get innovation a lot of times, but there is a cost. And the cost is often people feeling very anxious and stressed in his organization.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. Nice to visit today.